Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I rise today to support efforts by my Democratic colleagues to pass much-needed and delayed economic measures by unanimous consent. It is painful, obviously, that the economy is in such bad shape. Families and small business continue to struggle, and there is a real need for further federal assistance. In order to get our economy back on track, this body must take action in crafting another comprehensive bipartisan COVID relief package. And it must include additional help for families and communities, including eviction and foreclosure prevention assistance, as well as additional help for state and local governments. Last night, the Senate unanimously extended the PPP application window. This was a tiny but needed step in recognizing the depth of the economic crisis Americans are facing. Now the question before us is, will Republican leaders allow this body to work its will and provide needed, targeted, and effective rescue assistance? Or will it continue to delay and deny assistance, which will only prolong the pandemic, deepen the financial hole, and make the remedy costlier and the recovery steeper? Strong state and local governments are critical to our economy. Indeed, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, state and local governments provide about 20 million jobs and contributed 8.5% to national GDP in 2019. And they did so by not only serving as customers and clients for our local and national businesses, but also by providing the essential services such as public infrastructure.
The Senate will be in order. Please take conversations from the chamber.
Thank you,
Senator
Madam
from Rhode
President.
Island.
As I was indicating, state and local governments provide essential services such as public infrastructure, a strong education system, and other necessary functions that provide the business certainty that make our country attractive to businesses and investors throughout the world. We should do everything possible to maintain our country's comparative advantage relative to other countries. But today, as a result of the tremendous economic shock created by the coronavirus and the lack of a coherent public health strategy from the Trump administration, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities estimates that state revenue shortfalls will total about $615 billion over the next 3 fiscal years, not included the added cost of fighting COVID-19. And this is just for the states, $615 billion. That is why I initially fought for $750 billion in the coronavirus relief funds when negotiating the CARES Act and introduced S 3671, the State and Local Emergency Stabilization Fund Act, which would provide an additional $600 billion to state and local governments to supplement the $150 billion in coronavirus relief funds I secured in the CARES Act. But, Madam President, would it surprise you to learn that the Trump Treasury Department has needlessly created a bureaucratic regulation that makes it difficult for states to use these coronavirus relief funds? And that is a regulation that is standing in the way of what should have been an immediate $150 billion boost to our economy that even the Chamber of Commerce thinks is burdensome. Because of this onerous Trump rule, states can't use the coronavirus relief funds to replace lost or delayed tax revenues in order to maintain public services. And that is why Neil Bradley, the U.S. Chamber's chief policy officer, said in an interview, part of our conversation with Republicans on Capitol Hill is that, ironically, if your concern is big state government, then the last thing you want to do is force states to replace one-time lost revenue with permanent tax increases. As the primary author of the coronavirus relief funds, I can tell you that is fully within the Treasury Secretary's authority and the intent of the CARES Act for these funds to be used to replace lost or delayed tax revenues and maintain public services. To prevent the flexible use of these relief funds is a choice that is neither required nor intended by law. Unfortunately, This completely unnecessary choice has already created avoidable economic harm. Since February, state and local governments have cut a total of 1.5 million jobs, an 8% drop that is twice the decline seen during and after the 2007-2009 recession. In addition, the Center for Economic Policy and Research notes that job losses forced on state and local governments by pandemic-related shortfalls will disproportionately impact the African American workforce. 14% of state and local employees were African Americans compared to 11.7% of private sector employees, a margin of 20%. And as the Wall Street Journal itself reported in a May 24, 2020 article titled, "State and Local Budget Woes Create Drag for Economic Recovery Prospects," based on evidence from the last recession, Mr. Chodo Roresh, a Harvard economist professor, estimates that every dollar in cuts costs the overall economy $1.50 to $2. The principle also works in reverse, he said. Every additional dollar of spending adds 1.50 or $1.50 or $2 to the economy. Madam President, of all the regulations that this administration seeks to cut, it should start with this one if it really wants to help the economy. With just one stroke of the Treasury Secretary's pen, our economy could receive a direct multi-billion-dollar jolt today. But to be clear, this administrative fix is by no means sufficient because of the massive revenue shortfalls our state and local governments are facing. Congress still needs to provide additional and flexible fiscal relief to our state and local governments as part of the next fiscal package, and it is my hope that S3671, the State Local Emergency Stabilization Fund Act, is included. As I indicated earlier in my remarks, keeping families in their homes also must be included in the next package. According to Nicholas Q. Menti with the New England Public Policy Center in the Research Department at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, if current economic activity does not improve substantially without an extension of the CARES Act, unemployment insurance, or additional stimulus money or other fiscal relief, up to 13% of homeowners and 33% of renters in Rhode Island are at the risk of being unable to pay their mortgage or rent payments. This represents over 80,000 Rhode Island households. Nationally, according to the Census Survey data, 23% of all adults reported being housing insecurely in mid-June, meaning that they had missed last month's rent or mortgage payment or had slight or no confidence that their household can pay next month's rent or mortgage on time. We know that behind each one of these numbers is a family that could be homeless at the worst possible time in the middle of a public health emergency. For some, given their current health situations and age, there will be an additional human toll that we surely should try to avoid. We employ our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to work with us to keep our constituents in their homes so that they too can make it to the other side of this public health emergency. In that spirit, I draw your attention to S3620, the Housing Assistance Fund. This legislation expands the existing Hardest Hit Fund model and provides it with additional resources for each state to keep families in their homes, the utilities on, the internet connected, and the property taxes paid. As a result, landlords who are also struggling to pay their own bills would receive some assistance. Madam President, it's not every day the Independent Community Bankers of America and the Credit Union National Association support the same legislation with consumer rights and affordable housing organizations, such as the National Housing Conference, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, the Center for Responsible Lending, and the National Consumer Law Center, among others. As we work towards the next fiscal relief package, I hope you and our colleagues will consider joining with us in enacting S3620, the Housing Assistance Fund. But, Madam President, we can't stop there. We must also immediately, among other needs, Increase SNAP benefits to help the almost 150,000 Rhode Islanders who are food insecure during this crisis. Boost public health efforts to help keep the virus at bay, from more testing and contact tracing to supporting our healthcare providers to developing effective vaccine deployment systems. Help child care settings, public schools, and college campuses to safely reopen, and support libraries in keeping our communities connected. Provide relief for the hardest hit small and mid-sized businesses, many of which will continue to be shut down for the foreseeable future. And safeguard our election infrastructure, as Russia and other foreign actors seek again to use voter suppression, hacking, and disinformation in the 2020 elections. Madam President, what are we waiting for? It's not enough that, according to a June 29th CNBC article, the employment population ratio, the number of employed people as a percentage of the U.S. adult population, plunged to 52.8% in May, meaning 47.2% of Americans are jobless, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's not enough that 46% of Business Roundtable CEOs expect employment at their companies to decrease in the next 6 months. Madam President, we don't need to inflict any further necessary and unnecessary economic pain and suffering. I would also urge my colleagues to consider the economic and human cost of inaction. Indeed, during an April 29, 2020 press conference, Federal Reserve Chairman Powell stated, "I have long time been an advocate for the need for the United States to return to a sustainable path from a fiscal perspective at the federal level. We have not been on such a path for some time, which just means that the debt is growing faster than the economy." This is not the time to act on those concerns. This is a time to use the great fiscal power of the United States to do what we can to support the economy and try to get through this with as little damage to the long-run productive capacity of the economy as possible. Madam President, this week we're also considering the National Defense Authorization Act. And every year for the last 59 years, Democrats and Republicans have come together to strengthen our national security to help all Americans. We're proven that we're more than capable of working together productively on the most complex and controversial issues in the service of our constituents. And we'd like to continue that, not just in the context of national defense, but the context of economic prosperity and security. And one final point, we also need to extend unemployment compensation insurance, because we know it will run out, and everyone has told us that unemployment rates will not drop dramatically. They will stay persistently high. People will need this assistance going forward. So we must do much, and I hope we can do much together. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.